I just want to take a second to welcome everybody to Sound Walls, a big boost for early literacy. I'm Jillian Castor, Community Manager for Reading Horizons. And thank you so much for being here. I am here with Stacy Hurst. Stacy is a professor of teacher education at Southern Utah University, and Lindsay Kemeny, a Utah-based elementary classroom teacher. A little bit about Reading Horizons is that we are here to support educators with science-based, tech-enabled foundational reading with our tech-enabled reading program, and to help students reach reading proficiency by the end of third grade. So if you are interested in learning more about our phonics-based curriculum that is based in the science of reading, visit us online at readinghorizons.com. And I'm super excited because today we are going to be giving away a Sound City kit. So what that entails is phonemic awareness lesson plans, sound wall lesson plans, as well as posters, phoneme cards to use during instruction, and portable sound wall cards for each student. So after we get the list of everybody here, we're going to pick a random winner. We will announce it on our social media and email you if you are the winner. We are also going to open up another drawing after 1 month to give everybody a chance who is watching the recording to enter. So you will, if you're live today, you're actually going to be entered in twice. So a little bit more about Stacy and Lindsay. Like I said, Stacy is an assistant professor at Southern Utah University, and she serves as the Chief Education Officer at Reading Horizons. And Lindsay Kemeny is a second grade teacher, and you might recognize her from the Reading League as she's published articles in their journal and recently did a webinar for them. And Lindsay is a certified structured literacy classroom teacher and holds a master's degree in curriculum and instruction. Both Stacy and Lindsay are hosts of the popular podcast Literacy Talks. So I'm so glad you're all here, and I can't wait for you to go ahead. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Jillian. We're happy to be here too. We have a lot of really cool things to talk about today. I'm excited about the giveaway. I think, Lindsay, you and I probably don't qualify, but that's still exciting.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yes. So today we are going to talk about reading development, the decoding part of it in a nutshell. We know we could talk about that for a long time. So we're going to do a brief overview of that, reasons to use a sound wall, and then we're going to explore all those articulatory features of the English phonemes, consonant phonemes and vowel phonemes. And I know when I was first learning about those phonemes and sound walls, I actually couldn't hear them too many times because it's helpful to be able to really understand how those are categorized. And then Lindsay is going to help us to know how to set up a sound wall and what sound wall instruction looks like. So lots of fun stuff. Okay, for some reason, my slides, hang on. Okay, there we go. So we're going to start with just a little overview of how reading develops over time. And that's the key word, right? Over time. And many of you have probably seen this graphic that was brilliantly conceived by Hollis Scarborough. And she lays out for us all of those sub-skills that go into skilled reading. Today, we are going to focus on the word recognition strand of that rope. And that entails sight recognition, decoding and encoding, and phonological awareness. And we know our goals for this part of the rope are first accuracy, right? Awareness, accuracy, and then automaticity, the 3 A's. So we're going to talk about how those how a sound wall can support all of those areas of the rope. Another graphic that we frequently see when we're talking about reading development is the simple view of reading. And I know many of you probably seen this, but I love how Goff and Tunmer have helped make something that's so complex a little more palatable as we're learning about how reading develops in the brain. And they have taught us that there are some really important domains that are involved in reading comprehension, and that's decoding and language comprehension. And the way that they work together is important. They both need to be strong for us to have reading comprehension. And that is important because print is speech in a visual form. That's why we're going to talk a lot today about those sounds in our language. Again, it helps support that aspect of development. Here are some fun facts that I just like to mention these to put it in perspective, the importance of this speech to print approach. And it kind of mirrors the way that we develop as humans. We have been, as humans, in existence for about 6 million years, which I personally can't fathom, but that's a lot of years. But print, relatively speaking, has only been in existence for about 5,000 of those years, not even 10% of all of human history. So it really is a new, in a sense, technology, right? But speech, on the other hand, has been in existence from the beginning of time. So that speech develops naturally, and that happens before we learn to read, which requires instruction. So sound walls are going to help us with that. Steven Pinker, who is a cognitive psychologist, said it so well. And he said, children are wired for sound, but print is an optional accessory that must be painstakingly bolted on. So hopefully today we're going to make it less painstaking for us as teachers to bolt that on for our students. So how do we teach decoding from speech to print? And again, this is going to be in a nutshell because there's a lot that goes into how we learn to read and how we teach people to learn to read. So the first thing we need to make sure we're doing is facilitating that phoneme awareness, including articulation. Children and beginning readers, they don't hear sounds the way we do as adults. And a really good example of that would be children as they're learning the alphabet. How many of you either were this child or you've seen it, where they think elemento is one letter or one term, right? They don't hear that they're separate. Then we need to teach phoneme grapheme correspondences, and that's just as simple as teaching that that M spells the sound is spelled with the letter M, and then tacking those on, creating those relationships, and then explicitly teaching how those letter patterns function in words. So if you have a word and you put those letters that spell those sounds together, we call that a consonant vowel consonant pattern, and that's how those sounds would function in print. And then, of course, we have to provide so much practice for our students so that it becomes automatic. It gets in their long-term memory. So you can't unlearn it, and you can't help but read when print is put in front of you, right? That's our goal. And of course, we want to note that understanding or meaning is the reason that we're reading. So let's just break down really quickly how sound walls can be used as a tool to help us with those things that we need to do to teach speech to print. So that first one, facilitating phoneme awareness, including articulation, that's where the sound wall absolutely shines. That provides us instruction for placement and manner of articulation. So we have a curriculum that goes along with the sound wall, and you're going to be focusing on each of those phonemes. And then also, we're teaching those phoneme grapheme correspondences. When you use a sound wall, that helps you to introduce the most common grapheme initially for each phoneme. And then you're going to teach all the graphemes. And that is a really cognitively economical way to teach reading, because if you think about it, we have 44 sounds, and then we have 26 letters to represent those sounds in various combinations, over 250 combinations to be exact, well, to be general, to spell those 44 sounds. So the sound wall will help us to do that in a way that will not overwhelm our students. And then, of course, we need to explicitly teach how those letter patterns function in words. We call that phonics. And we're not going to teach our sound wall in isolation. It's not just a sound wall for the sake of having a sound wall. We're doing it for fun. And it is fun, by the way. But we're going to connect it to our phonics instruction. So our students are making those connections between speech sounds and print. And then also, we need to provide a lot of practice, of course, through reading and spelling, as we mentioned. Sound walls are a really good tool for that. Students who learn with a sound wall have a tool that will help them solidify those spellings, or when they come to a spelling in a word that they aren't familiar with, they can look to the sound wall as a resource for that. So this is an important distinction to make because we do have in education word walls that we've been using in the past. And if you've listened to, here's a shameless plug for our podcast, Literacy Talks, you know that I frequently brag about my word wall. It was fantastic. I had an amazing word wall by any stretch. But there were some limitations to that word wall. So we want to make sure that we're distinguishing the difference between word walls and sound walls. So one thing to keep in mind is that word walls were created by proficient readers, right? From the teacher perspective. So we use an alphabetical order, which was good for those of us who know that the word the starts with the letter T. But for our students who are just learning these things, that creates another roadblock for them in becoming proficient with that. Also, it is a print to speech approach, meaning we're going to memorize that word as a whole and then connect it, make connections between the way it looks by the way the word is shaped. I think a lot of us have had this experience when they see children confuse the word said and because they're shaped the same way. So there isn't a focus on the individual phonemes necessarily. You're just memorizing one word as a whole. Now, when I taught my sound wall, I did 5 words a week. It was ceremonious. I mean, it was so involved. But when you're teaching with a sound wall and you're teaching those 44 phonemes, you're not limited to a certain number of words. You can actually combine those phonemes to make an infinitesimal number of words. So we're really being more efficient that way as well. And then I think the other really important thing is that it requires a lot of teacher support for students. Word wall does compared to a sound wall. If a student needs to know how a sound is spelled, they can refer to the sound wall. The word wall, not so much because we're focusing just on words, right? But if they need to know, if they're practicing spelling or reading, they could turn to a sound wall to find that phoneme or that spelling that's going to help them. Word walls, not so much, again, because we're focusing on whole words. So those are some important distinctions to make. I would also add that as Lindsay talks more about how to use sound walls and how to create them, keep in mind that if you're using a word wall, just think about how that might change your practice. Maybe you're going to transition from using a word wall to a sound wall. Word walls have value if we're focusing on vocabulary. So I've seen a lot of classrooms that have math word walls or science word walls or terms that they're learning in a lot of subject areas, but they're mostly focused on meaning at that point. Okay, wow, I feel like I've said a lot already, but Lindsay, take it from here and show us how.
Okay.
Tell us about the sounds and then show us how to do the thing.
All right, so a sound wall in comparison to that word wall, that now the sound wall is going to be set up by the sounds, not by the letters. So now if there's that little student that doesn't know how to spell the word the, they can look at their mouth and making that first sound, and then find, where on the sound wall they can find that mouth picture. Look underneath, and they can see that grapheme or the letter representation right there, TH. So like Stacy was saying, it's really just limitless because they can just make an infinite, this can help them with so many different words rather than just being limited like on the word wall to just the words on the wall. So let's go to my next slide. There are 44 phonemes in English. So a phoneme is just the smallest unit of speech. So if you think of the word chip, ch, it, p, there are 3 phonemes in that sound or in that word. And so our first phoneme, ch, is represented by 2 different letters. So there's 4 letters, but only 3 sounds. So there are about 44 phonemes in English. Sometimes you'll see a little bit more or less depending on dialect. And we can categorize these phonemes by consonant sounds and by vowel sounds.
So we're going to talk to understand this and to know how to set up a sound wall. You really have to understand these phonemes. So we're going to briefly talk about these. So for the consonant phonemes, we can talk about these by place of articulation and manner of articulation. And this is just kind of a fancy way of organizing and grouping them. So if you can see on the top of this consonant chart, which if you're familiar with Dr. Louisa Moats, you have seen this, or if you're taking letters training, you have probably seen this. So place of articulation is just where in your mouth the sound is being produced. So you can see in the very left, we have our lips. And so we have all those sounds, p, b, we're making those at the front of our mouth. And we can go all the way back to the very back of our throat, and even the glottis for that sound. And then on the left, we have the blue that I've circled here is the manner of articulation. And that is just telling us what's happening with the airflow as we make those sounds. So we're going to talk about each of these groups here on the left. So, and I just saw this question, which I was about to talk about in the chat, which is a great point. So, let me go back. So we have the technical terms here, like fricatives and affricates. We don't need to bog our students down with this terminology. So the important thing is not that I'm not going to test my students on the sound wall and who knows what a fricative is, right? The important thing is that we're drawing an awareness to the phoneme. We're talking about those sounds, talking about what's happening with our mouth, and then we're connecting it to the letters. So I kind of like to think of it as a sound spelling wall. So the terms we use over here, the technical terms, are not as important. It's drawing an awareness of the phonemes. That's the important thing. And then connecting it with the grapheme. So you can see here's another example of the consonant chart. And you can see that this company has changed the fricatives to windy sounds. And that's just a little more kid friendly. So you can see this is set up for, just for the student perspective. And then they can look, we have the stop sounds at the top, and they can see these little stop signs that will help them, and the nasals. And you can see the birds and the wind for those windy sounds, and the windy stops are a combination of our windy sounds and our fricatives. Those are the affricates. So that is just a kid-friendly term. I've seen another company that calls, I think the fricatives are lip coolers, because you're kind of, blowing on there. So anyway, so that was a great question, but it's not about the technical terms. So you don't need to worry about like, oh, I'm teaching these brand new kindergartners, it's a little too much for the cognitive load. You don't have to teach those terms. Okay, so let's talk about the stops. So we have 6 stop sounds. And what happens when you say these sounds is you stop the air and then you let it out in one big puff. So you can hold your hand out and you can try this where you can say these sounds p, b, t, d, k, g, and you can feel that puff of air. And what's really important on the stop sounds is that we clip off that schwa sound. So a lot of times, and I did this at first when I was first teaching, I added that schwa and I would say pa, ba, ta. And a lot of times as teachers, we want to be heard. So we add that schwa, pa. But you can see the problem if you look up in my corner there, where a student goes to spell dog and they write it like this, da-og. And if you're a kindergarten teacher, you've probably seen this. And even when they're blending and sounding out, I would have the same thing. If I haven't taught my students the sound k, and they've been saying ka, then they go ka at, cut. It just adds another layer of complexity. It's a little bit harder. And that's why it's important for us to clip off that schwa sound and think of just saying the sound like k. All right. The nasal sounds are fun. We have 3 of them. So go ahead and try plugging your nose and saying the sound mm. And you can't do it. And that's because with the nasal sounds, the airflow is going through our nose when we produce those sounds. So that is so fun for the students to see. And then we have n is another nasal, and which is really hard for students to isolate. So a lot of phonics programs, you'll see that they put the vowel sound and teach it as a unit. Well, they'll teach ang, ing, ung. And so that makes sense because it's just hard for those little students to isolate that sound. Sometimes people are wondering about this spelling, just the N, that just the letter N can represent that sound like an ink, sunk, bank. The N is representing that sound there. Okay, let's go on. So these are our fricative sounds. Again, this one is just using the friendly term, student-friendly term, windy sounds. And these ones are windy sounds because you can fill that air, and as long as you have the breath for it, you can produce that sound. So we have that's interesting thing to think about is that's two different sounds for th, and then we have the one voiced and unvoiced pair, which we'll talk about in a minute, and then we have sh, zh, and h. So those are our fricatives. Our affricates are a combination between a fricative sound and a windy and a stop sound. And I like to think we have two, ch and j. And I like to think of tug of war when we do these, where you can like think of pulling into tug of war game and then letting go. And that's kind of what's happening with the sound. You're going ch, j. So you're kind of pulling and then letting go. Then we have our glides, w and y. And the glides, just when they're in a word, they really glide into the next sound. And one interesting note is this first one here, the WH sound, is actually disappearing from our American dialect of English. Most people just pronounce the w sound. So we don't say what, we say what with the voiced w. So that's kind of interesting, but will find people, and I think in the UK and things, they still pronounce that w. So kind of an interesting note. And then we have our liquid sounds, and and these, the airflow is kind of, we describe it to the students like, like a river is kind of overflowing and the water's going everywhere. It's kind of what's happening with the air in your mouth. And these change, the pronunciation changes just a little bit depending on where it is in the word, the or depending if it's at the beginning, middle, or end. Okay, that was like a fast crash course on consonants. So I know I was talking fast to get through that.
It feels like it, but yeah, that's good.
So,
all good information, though.
So let's do a little pop quiz, okay? I'm going to give you a sound and put in the chat what type of sound it is. If it's a stop, if it's a nasal, liquid, glide, fricative, affricate. And you don't have to. I know we have a lot of people. It's okay if you don't know. You can just watch. Okay, so here's our first sound. That's a hint. What is that? Yes, it's blowing up. You guys got it. That's a stop sound. Okay, here's our next one. I can feel the air blowing constantly. That is, okay, yes, windy sound, which is a fricative sound, which I forgot to say on the fricatives. You want to think of friction. There's some type of friction happening with the airflow as it comes out. So like in that sound, zzz, it's kind of like our teeth and our tongue. I forgot to mention that. Okay, so good, fricative or windy sound. All right, here's your next one. That's a little hint too. Yes, that's a nasal. You guys are doing awesome. Okay, we have j, j. A hard one. There's only two of these. J. Yes, I'm starting to see it. That's an affricate, or like on that poster was the windy stop. Good.
Windy stop.
We have
yeah, that's great.
is our next one. Ol is a liquid. That one's a liquid. I know the liquids and glides are kind of tricky. And our last one, which you could probably guess from process of elimination, we have y. Y. Y is our glide. Very good, you guys. Awesome. Okay, let's keep going. So another fun thing about the consonant sounds is that they can be voiced or voiceless. So if you try, you could say the sound put your hand on your throat and say and you can feel that vibration because we're using our vocal cords when we make that sound. But now try the sound s. Now feel s. There's no vibration. We are not using our voice. So when you look here at the consonant chart, it's really interesting because a lot of the consonants are voiced, unvoiced pairs. So you can see they're in the same box. We have p, b. Our mouth is moving the same way. The only difference is one uses your voice and one doesn't. So if you have a student that writes the word skin up here like this, what do you notice about the g sound and the k sound? You can see that they're in the same box, k and g. The only difference between those two sounds is one uses your voice and one doesn't. So that can be so helpful because for your student, now you're saying, oh, okay, this student just needs to, I need to draw an awareness to when we're using our voice and when we're not, and that's going to help them as they're spelling. Not this current year, but last year, one of my students would mix up the letters L and N. And I thought that, and both of those letters were in his name. And I thought that was so weird because I was like, L and N, those letters don't even look alike. Why is he mixing those up? So I want you to look here at the consonant chart. What do you notice about the ul phoneme and the n phoneme? Yes, Dolores. They're in the same column. They're made in the same kind of place with your tongue behind your teeth, and you can try ul, n, ul, and you can see that it's just this little difference between placement of the tongue. Your tongue is a little farther back. So for this student, that's what we pulled out our mirrors. We talked about that, noticed, and kind of really felt that, and that really helped him to distinguish between those. So that was
which is
awesome.
really important to focus on those individually. And somebody had a question in the chat that I think is important to address right now too. We're going to introduce these one at a time very explicitly, and you have options as to the order that you're going to introduce them in depending on the grade level. But a really important thing to mention too, we start with that speech sound that becomes the anchor, and the manner of articulation and the placement in our mouth is actually how our brain recognizes that sound. So we really are bolting on not only the sound, but then eventually the grapheme too.
Yes. Okay, so here are our vowel phonemes. So this will look familiar if you're familiar with Dr. Moats and letters training, but you may have wondered why the vowels are set up in a V like this. So watch my mouth as I read the sounds starting at the top with the E going down on this left side. Watch my chin. E, a, I, ah. So you can see how my chin is dropping. And then as I go back up the Vowel Valley, u, u, my chin is raising back up. So that is why the vowels are set up like this. And then here is the Vowel Valley poster from Reading Horizons. And so you can see this one's just a little more kid friendly. You can see on the left, they call it smile slope, because if you look at those sounds, those mouth pictures on the left were all in like wide or small smiles. So that smile slope. And then over here, you can see on the right side that our lips are all rounded on this side, and that is circle path. So calling them these different names just helps that with students, helps orient them where to find the sound as they're looking and utilizing the sound wall as they're writing. So, and then we also have down here are our diphthongs. And this is just two mouth movements. So you think oi, ow. Our mouth starts in one position and ends in another. And then I tell my students, look, oi, ow, oi, ow. Our mouth is kind of going back and forth. The sound goes back and forth, just like the sound swings. So we call them the sound swings over here. And they love this. And then we have our corner garden over here. These are our controlled vowels. So there's three of those, r, and or. Okay.
And all those visuals just help them anchor those sounds even more.
Yes.
Put them in their long-term memory.
So we also have the schwa. So you can see here, the schwa is that reduced vowel sound. So if you think of the word salad, 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 we have an accent on our first syllable, sal, and then our second syllable is unaccented. And that's where you find the schwa in an unaccented syllable. So we don't say salad, it's salad. And so that vowel being reduced to kind of a or I sound is the schwa. So I don't have the schwa. I don't have the schwa on my physical sound wall just because I don't find it that helpful with my students with spelling, since any vowel can spell that sound. But I absolutely do teach it and explicitly teach that, and we talk about it in our phonics lesson. So, and there's a sound wall lesson I do for that too.
Yeah, and a high quality program will have those. They will address the schwa for sure. So just to recap what we've learned so far, that it's most efficient, cognitively economical to teach from speech to print. Learning to speak is natural, learning to read is not. Research supports teaching those articulatory features of the phonemes so that students can really focus in on how they're produced and then eventually connect them to the spellings that we see in print. Phoneme is the smallest unit of sound. And I think, Lindsay, that neither one of us mentioned that. That is what a phoneme is, the smallest unit of speech. We have 44 of those phonemes in our language. They can be generally categorized into consonant and vowel sounds. And the place and manner of articulation is really important, including whether or not we use our voice or not. And with consonants, and that's when Lindsay mentioned the voiced and voiceless idea, that is applicable to consonants. Vowels are all voiced. They kind of connect those consonant sounds together. Okay, how did I do on the recap, Lindsay?
Great recap. Thank you, Stacy. Okay, so how many speech sounds are in our language? There's 44. That, as I said, can vary depending on dialect. We only have 26 letters to spell all those 44 sounds. And so that's where it gets really fun. And we have over 250 ways to spell those sounds, which is one reason why we're using that sound wall to help us as we learn all those.
So, Lindsay, you mentioned it before, but I think it's a good thing to note that we refer to it as a sound wall, but eventually it becomes a sound spelling wall.
Yes.
It helps us with that.
Exactly. So let's talk about all the fun stuff, how to set up a sound wall. So you definitely want some kind of divider between your vowel sounds and your consonant sounds. So you kind of want to differentiate between those. And then I do recommend keeping the vowel sounds in the V. And I just think that makes sense. And it's the students, once they learn where to look for that, it just is awesome for them. And then the consonant chart, I would group them at least by manner of articulation. So those stop sounds, the glides together, etc. So these, I had these in my wall. These are from my classroom here. And you can see they have the mouth picture and then they have all the spellings, the graphemes. But you wouldn't just put this up like this at the beginning of the year because that would be really overwhelming. So what I do is put sticky notes over all the spellings until I explicitly teach them with my phonics lesson. And then I'm going to take the sticky note off and show that one. You want to think through how you want to do this because some teachers might turn them all the cards over and then flip them over as they teach them and introduce them. Or maybe you don't want anything on the wall and you're going to put them up one at a time. So kind of the first thing is to think through how you want to do that. This is what I have on my wall now, where these are the posters. And so it was kind of nice because I didn't have to think through like how to set it up. I just had to stick the poster up. So that was easier. But again, you need to cover all those spellings. Don't start the beginning of the year with all of them shown like this because that's just cognitive overload for those kids.
Yeah, and some of that depends on the grade level. They may have already been introduced to some of those graphemes. You just, like Lindsay said, make that decision.
Yes. And yeah, I keep the mouth pictures up. I let the mouth pictures, some teachers do it different, right? I let the mouth pictures be up there all the time and it's kind of fun for them to see those. And then I just unveil the grapheme when we introduce it. So I want to show you a lot of different examples of consonant charts that I don't own all these pictures, but I found them online. Some great examples of how you can set them up. So I'll just go through these quickly, but I thought this one was neat because she has the spellings all on a different card. So then she will just add the spelling as she teaches it. And I also like that they had this little voiced icon for the ones that are voiced versus the ones that are unvoiced. This one has some words on it. So if you want to, you can put some words up there. You just remember you don't have to put a lot like the word wall because a lot of the ones up there are actually like the students can write those. They can write that. They can look, they can find the TH spelling and the A and the T. So, but sometimes other ones like the word said might be tricky for your students to spell for a while. So you might choose to put that one up there. So this one is one example where they have some words on there. This is mine from several years ago. And this one I just created myself before I had the one I do now. And I just took my own kids, I have 4 children. I just took pictures of their own mouths one summer and then printed those out and put them up. And that worked. The downside is that there wasn't a lot of diversity since I only used my own 4 children. And then I made the little grapheme, the little letter cards there to match what I was teaching. So that's an inexpensive way to do it if you want, is just to make your own. And you could also, what would be really fun is using your own students in your classroom and taking pictures and putting them up there. That would be awesome. Just a little bit of work. So there's another one. You can see the sticky notes covering. That's the one I made. Here's one, different mouth pictures, all set up by the manner of articulation, which I like. This is that other one. These are the Reading Horizons cards. And this is the poster, which I have up on my classroom wall now. And then some people, if you have the space, so I group mine just by the manner of articulation, those on the left, the titles there. But some people can also fit this whole chart and do it by place of articulation too. So here's a couple pictures I saw of that where they did it by both and had the whole chart up there. I just don't have really the space for this, which is fine, because as long as the students can use it, and access it, that's great. You can see her sticky notes all over here. And I love that she just has sticky notes on the top for the labels because, hey, you can keep it simple.
It's true.
And then this is the Reading Horizons one. Whoops, that's the software version. And I'll talk more about that a little bit. And then the vowel chart. So let's see examples of the vowels. So a reminder to pattern it. I would keep your vowels just like this in this Vowel Valley. So this is the one I made when I was first teaching kindergarten. And I just want to point out something, because if you look close, there's something that's technically incorrect here. And if you look at the bottom, the short O, ah, and right next to it to the right, I have the AW, ah. And technically, if you look at Louisa Moats's Vowel Valley, then the AW, ah should switch places with the short U, And I put it down there. At first, I didn't realize that it was wrong. And then I realized I did, but I decided to keep it there. And the reason why is because here in Utah, and we really don't hear or say, pronounce ah and ah very different. That's really hard for me to hear. And of course, for my students too. So I was like, you know what? That's okay, because I can reflect our dialect here. So just kind of, and I know if I'm confusing those sounds, my students are too. So just an interesting note. Here's another Vowel Valley. Again, this is the one with the spellings where she's putting up the card with the spellings each time. Another one, nice and neat. Another one with some words on there, and you can see the sticky notes. This one only has the mouth pictures, just a couple of them. And I think this one is neat, especially for maybe older students, because she has written the percentages of frequency with those spellings along the side. And how neat, because the students, if they don't know which spelling to use, they look up there and they could just, hey, let's use the most frequent one. So that's a great example too. Here's another one. I'm just going through these quickly so you can get an idea. And this is that poster that I have up there too, which is so fun, so vibrant.
And posters are really handy, especially in my setting. Of course, I'm teaching pre-service teachers, or maybe you're an interventionist or a speech and language therapist that needs to move from place to place. Posters are a little bit easier to carry than an entire. It's just a little more efficient that way.
Yeah, the posters from Reading Horizons, someone was asking. And, you can use the sound wall for all grades. Our friend and fellow co-host Donnell Pons teaches adults, and she's using the sound wall for adults. So yeah, I mean, I think anyone, especially as you're spelling and you want to refer to, the different spellings a sound can represent, then that's awesome. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is to consider space. So when you're putting it up, you need to think about where you have space. So this is my old classroom when I taught kindergarten, and you can see I just fit it under the windows there. I love this idea from a teacher to have it on these trifold boards. How great, especially if you're maybe an interventionist or you move from room to room, or maybe you have different, maybe you're a special education teacher and you have different groups of students that haven't learned all the sounds and you want to have a different board for your different group. I thought this was a great idea.
I love how creative we get as educators.
Yeah.
It works.
And then this one, I love that they made use of their cupboards. So they put their sound wall on the cupboards. This one found space above the windows. I would just caution not to have it too high because you want your students to be able to interact and see it. This is a little student in my class, and so even though we have the sound wall on the wall, he loved to pull out his individual sound wall. And this is great too. If you don't have space on the wall, then he has it right there. He has it propped up on his water bottle, and as he's writing, he's using that. And then the consonants are on the other side, so he can just flip it over. So, and then another idea would be a digital sound wall. So this is that same little student in my class this year, and he's accessing the software for the sound wall. And then just a note to cover those graphemes that haven't been taught. Cover them with sticky notes, and then only take it off as you teach.
I think that's fun for kids too. I think they look forward to seeing what's under the sticky note.
Oh, my students were always, and then by the end of the year, because this past year I'm teaching second grade, and so by the end of the year, I mean, almost all of them were off, but they had a couple, they could see this. What haven't we learned? What's under that one? And it was like built up all this excitement for the last
one. The suspense
so.
was killing them, I'm sure.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And then, of course, you want it to be grade level appropriate. So I love these ones. These are by Reading Horizons too, because they have the kindergarten version on the left versus the more advanced first through third version. Because in kindergarten, I'm only going to teach, that S represents and SS represents. But, in second grade, I'm going to teach them that when there's a I, E, or Y after C, then that's going to represent the S sound. So as we teach them, we unveil them. Now, if the one you have doesn't have two versions, that's okay, because if you're teaching kindergarten, you can just keep those sticky notes over them, so at the end of the year, you might still have a lot of sticky notes because you haven't taught those in your phonics, and that's okay. But then it's also a fun way to differentiate, because you can tell students that's ready. Oh, you're ready for this spelling. Go look under that one, and they can go look and see it. So.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about what sound wall instruction looks like. Oh, I got to hurry because we're almost out of time. But you want to think of flipping your instruction to start with the sound instead of starting with that letter. So it's a great introduction to your phonics. So like in kindergarten, I would do letter a day. So now you want to think about sound of the day. And so my kindergartners would come in and I wouldn't even show them the letter yet, but I'd say, the sound that we're learning today is ah. Let's get out our mirrors. Look at your mouth. What is it doing when you say ah? And we're going to talk about that, talk about what our mouth, what our tongue is doing. And then I'm going to say, are you ready to see what sound represents the ah sound? We find the sound on the sound wall. We take the sticky note off. It's the letter A. Letter A is a spelling for ah. And then you're going to go into your phonics lesson. So I have a little video of a sound wall lesson from my classroom. So if we want to queue up that video one, we can watch that.
All right, let's find out what sound we're talking about today for our sound wall lesson. So tell me the first sound you hear in these words. Nut, nail, neck. Yes, they all start with the sound n. So n is the sound we're talking about today. Watch my mouth as I say n. Now it's your turn. Will you get out your mirrors and say n with me? Good. Look at your mouth as you say and pay attention to what your mouth is doing. Are your lips open when you say this sound? Yes, they are. But the tongue is kind of blocking your mouth from being all the way open, right? Say again. Look in the mirror. Is there something that's blocking the air as it comes out?
Yes.
Yeah, our tongue is, right? Can you tell? Say again. Do you see how the tongue kind of a little bit blocks the air? So that means this is a consonant sound. What is your tongue doing? Say again and think what your tongue is doing. Where's your tongue?
At the top.
Yes, it actually is pushing against the bumps right behind your front teeth. So you can feel that. Think about your tongue is right on those bumps. Try that again. Now we're going to try something a little tricky. Plug your nose. It was kind of fun. And now try to say You can't do it, right? You can't do it. Guess what? That is because is a nasal sound. We use our nose to make this sound. The air actually flows through your nose when you make that sound. So this is kind of fun if you put your fingers really lightly on your nose. Don't squeeze and just go You can feel it vibrating. Do you feel that? That's so cool. Okay, put your hand on your throat and say Are you using your voice with this sound? Yes, you are. Do you feel that vibration? Yes, the uses our voice. Very good. Okay, put your mirrors down. Put those away. And now we're going to review the sound. I'm going to say words. This time, repeat the whole word. And then if you hear the sound, give me a thumbs up. If you don't hear the sound, give me a thumbs down. Okay? All right. No. Say, everyone say it. No. Did you hear I should see a thumbs up. Everyone looking at me. I want everyone's eyes. Ready? Cat.
Cat.
Yeah, thumbs down. Kitten. You should have a thumbs up. There's that at the end. Yep. Morning. Morning. I hear that in the middle. Signal. Signal. Let me see. Thumbs up or thumbs down? Yes, you should have a thumbs up. Bubblegum. Oh, I see. Some of you knew right away. So quick. Nice job. Parrot. Did you hear it? Nope. Mine. Yes, there's one at the end. Okay, let's find this sound on our sound wall. So we know it's a consonant sound, so it's going to be over with consonant corner. Can you try to point to the picture that matches? Yes. There it is. We've already learned a couple spellings for Today we're going to learn a new spelling. Houston, will you take that sticky note off? What is it? K-N. Yes, and I have it on my card right here. Let's take that off so we can see K-N is another spelling for Okay, let me show you this up here. We are going to mark this word like we do our other digraphs with the arc underneath, but we're going to make that K silent. It's just that sound. So let's look at a word that has this spelling. If I was going to mark this word, I'm going to mark my K-N. Then I'm going to X my vowel. We remember to come around like a race track. Do we have a guardian? Yes, we do. So my vowel is going to be what, class? Short. Very good. And what's the word? Knot. This is kind of like I tied my shoelaces into a knot. All right. Can you guys tell me what you would mark first on this word? Chloe?
First you mark your K-N.
Yes. And I got to make that K silent. What am I going to do next? Look at all these hands. Oh, my goodness. Jacob?
So you first make your second E silent.
Right.
And then that silent E makes the first E long.
Very good. Okay, what's the word, class?
Knee.
Knee, like I fell down and hurt my knee. Awesome. Are you guys ready to write some of these yourself on your whiteboards?
Yes.
All right.
But I wanted you to see how you can bridge into your phonics lesson, because then that was the beginning of the phonics lesson. And our sound wall lessons don't need to be really long. We don't need to be spending 15, 20 minutes just on the sound wall. We want to have that awareness to the phoneme, and then we want to connect it with the grapheme. So initially, I just kind of made up my lessons. When I just kind of was shooting from the hip and just kind of making it up. Now I have these little lessons that I can follow because they only take a few minutes and it's all scripted for me. And then it has those little phonemic awareness activities with the words where they can do thumbs up or thumbs down. And then if I want more technical information for me, then there's those notes on the side that, a speech language pathologist notes and other things if I want a little more information. So that has been really great for me. So there's also an interactive soundwall software that we've been able to use this year, which has been so neat. So my students have loved it. So if we can just queue up, this video is just like 2 minutes. So just hang with me and I'll show you a little bit about that.
So the students can click and interact with these cards. So there's a keyword picture. So this is A for acorn. And so a common spelling will be on the front, and they can click this to see other spellings of that sound. They can click the image here and hear the sound.
A.
They can also click this button here. Will give them a little teacher directed lesson on the sound. It's just, most of them I think are between 1 and 2 minutes long. And then the camera here, they can take a picture of their own mouth and record their voice saying the sound. So let me show you go over to consonant corner. These are our consonant sounds, and there's a little character that will talk about those sounds.
Ooh, what is that smell? Even the garbage cans in consonant corner remind us of sounds. They're called nasal sounds. Nasal means nose, and we use our nose to make the nasal sounds and
so I'll go ahead and exit out of there, but you kind of get the idea. It's really fun. And then just let me show you how they can record and take a picture. So there's my picture, and I can submit that to my teacher. Okay, so we can check. And now that submits it to their teacher. And then as a teacher, I can quickly go in, and once I approve a student's submissions, then it's going to replace this mouth picture with their own mouth picture and their own little audio clip or video clip of them saying the sound. So that's really neat. My students have loved that feature. It just makes it really interactive.
And then just so fun because they couldn't wait to see their own mouths. And they would tell me, Mrs. Kemeny, you haven't approved my picture yet, And I'm like, oh, yes, thank you. I'll approve those so that it would populate on their own wall. So with our sound walls, I think it's really important to remember the overall goal is proficient reading and writing. So it's not just a sound wall for sound wall's sake. Like I said earlier, it's not just having them memorize like the word fricative or affricate or memorizing all those sounds, right? The point is proficient readers. So how do they get to proficient reading? Well, they need to read words accurately and with automaticity. How do they get there? Well, they need that solid phoneme grapheme correspondence. They need to match the sound with the letters, which is one of the things we're doing with the sound wall. And how do they get there? Well, they need that phoneme articulation instruction. So I just think it's really good to always remember the overall goal with the sound wall. It's a tool, and the power comes in our instruction that goes along with it. And just remember that the more you refer to and use the sound wall, the more your students will, because anyone can throw up something on the wall and it will just become wallpaper if you don't interact with it. So the magic comes in your instruction and as you refer to it. And if a student asks me how to spell something, then I'm saying, they say, how do you spell house? Well, what sound do you need help with? Ow. Okay, let's look on our sound wall. Where's the ow sound, right? And I'm constantly referring to it, and then my students are referring to it. So that is great. So I hope that was helpful. Stacy, you want to recap for us?
Sure, I will do that really quickly. We learn speech to print. Soundwall reflects that. We start phonics instruction with phonemic awareness. Again, we're always going to connect the two because the goal is proficient reading. Those 44 phonemes provide an anchor for us. So we're going to teach those and have students articulate them clearly. That's especially important for students who are learning English or maybe have some speech and language issues as well. So important for all students, but especially important for some. We saw examples of sound walls, which I hope you got a lot out of. And we were able to see a sound wall lesson, which is really powerful. And my favorite thing about that lesson was connecting it to that phonics instruction, because for those students, that's going to be really filed in their brain in a way that they can access it quickly. And again, remember, we started with that, focusing on these skills need to become automatic so that our brain is freed up when we're reading to focus on the meaning. Big ideas. There we go. Do we have time for questions? I don't know. Jillian, where are we on that? Jillian, come back.
We can't hear you, Jillian.
You might be muted, Jillian.
There we go. That was so awesome. And I just love reading the chat. There's so many good questions. I know we're not going to have time to get to hardly any of them, but one question that I did see that came up a bit that I just want to ask you is references. Where can we point teachers and educators to go next?
Great questions. And Lindsay and Donnell and I just did a podcast on this, and Jillian, you would know this, but I think we have a lot of references listed there as well. So Literacy Talks, again, another shameless plug.
Yeah, but we have, what is our podcast episode called? Is it the Here one? It's specifically on sound walls. That would be great because we just discuss it a little bit more there.
Fabulous. And I am going to go through all the questions and we're going to get together and make sure that we answer all of them. So we will link that podcast episode and all of the resources that go along with that. I did want to, and actually, let me see. I'm going to jump ahead to slide 5 real quick because I just want to remind you all that we are doing a giveaway. So tomorrow on social media, you will hear from us. One of you will win the kit that comes with the manuals, with the explicit lessons, the posters, the portable sound cards, the whole kit and caboodle. So be on the lookout for that. And then a couple more quick things before we go. I'm going to try and get us out very quick, but if you don't want to wait till tomorrow, you want to go to Literacy Talks, you can find that at readinghorizons.com/literacy talks. Thank you again, Stacy and Lindsay, for an outstanding webinar, and thank you everybody who joined today. We are so glad to have you with us.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. And good luck with the draw, with the winning. I could just get so excited about that. I will be so excited for whoever wins.
Yes, there'll be 2 winners. So one tomorrow, and then we'll give people time to watch the recording. So
great. Thank you. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you.